Okay, here we are once again for another episode of FSUFO, also known as Forbidden Science. And today we have a very special guest, a research scientist and author. Bob Davis is going to look at aspects of consciousness and all kinds of things here. And it's through the cleverness and the boldness of Justin Brown that we have him as a special guest here today. And Justin, you know, and I know, I think, how consciousness, it's often said, here's the biggest cliche of the field, that to have a UFO sighting, you need two things. You need a UFO and you need a witness. And when you have witnesses, you have aspects of consciousness, at least we hope so. And also, not just on the individual level, but as a species, as a race, and as a culture. And our guest today is going to help us explore all the aspects of that, and particularly, I think, the true nature of those words. And it's not going to be just semantics, it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you yourself have investigated cases of reality transformation, even here locally, where one person has claimed to have seen a UFO and the other one didn't, but heard it and felt it in two different stories, but the same event. So there's definitely consciousness at work here. Being so lucky to have Bob on the show. You know me well, Chris. I often get giddy about this subject, but I've been really holding it together for the show and trying to remain calm. But today I am pretty giddy about having Bob here, who's so politely told us to call him Bob and not doctor. He does have a Ph.D.
Yeah, we'll forgive you for that, for the giddiness. We'll forgive you, not for calling him Bob or saying that. It's funny. I have to say this slightly off topic. One quick little thing. When you say that, there was a recent special on TV where a bunch of experts were recounting Stanton Friedman, and they kept calling him doctor, and he was not. He was a master of physics. So labels, we make too much of it anyway. But yeah, our guest today was gracious enough to say that, and I can't wait to get on that topic too, because I think consciousness, it's not just like looking at UFOs and writing down a figure and having a stack of forms under your arm. You have to look into this, the witness and consciousness and what these things are. It's an integral part of the experience.
And there often is a transformation that takes place with witnesses in these events as well. And it's really poignant having Bob on the show right now, because him with a filmmaker, Dave Beatty, he's the guy who did the documentary on the Nimitz encounter. He's got over 5 million views right now for that. He and Bob synchronistically came together to make that film, and we're going to talk about all that too, because I feel like synchronicity has something to play into this conscious connection with the phenomenon, as well as a number of other factors. The new documentary that's coming out, or is out, we'll have to ask Bob about this. It's called The Consciousness Connection, and I think we're going to have a trailer. Do we want to play the trailer first, Chris?
Yeah, let's go with the trailer there, if we're ready there.
Lots to talk about.
What is consciousness? A quantum field? A structure in the brain? A multi-dimensional projection? The very essence of awareness that gives rise to life.
It's a mystery because we don't know what we're trying to explain.
There's people that fall into consciousness and material.
Consciousness has so many different meanings.
Consciousness is a hybrid, it's technology.
How does it connect us with our world, our universe, and life beyond?
Because consciousness interacts with our physical environment, reality. That is the missing link.
What if consciousness is a force to Earth just like gravity?
Is there a link between consciousness, extrasensory perception, and other anomalous events?
It could be a near-death experience with the beautiful white light, the interaction with many different types of entities. People have out-of-body experiences, from meditation to psychoactive drugs.
And I think this is really important when you look at extraterrestrial experiencers or people that have had these peak experiences.
My daughter and I walked out of a movie theater at night. My daughter pointed up in the sky and she said, "What's that?" And it was just sitting there. It was a boomerang-shaped craft the size of a football field, a large orb telescoped open. It moved around like it was searching for something. Once you experience it, you can't go back. You suddenly, you know that reality is unbelievably bizarre.
And the dimensionality of consciousness is going to move us into advancing who we are as humans.
But we await the paradigm shift, which is critical in terms of our understanding the science of the subjective, integrating it with the science of the physical in order to better understand consciousness, reality, and maybe a little bit more about what life and reality is all about.
Will we break through the stigma of this science of the extraordinary and challenge the true nature of reality in the Consciousness Connection?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. He's
Some
the
trailer,
author.
eh?
Oh, geez. It elicits so many questions, right? And this person is really, really interesting. I'm glad to have him here. He's the author of 3 books: The UFO Phenomenon, Life After Death, and this I think is really relevant. His book called Unseen Forces. Bob, so privileged. Thank you for accepting my cold calls and coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for calling. It's a pleasure to be with both of you gentlemen.
Well, Bob, I have to ask there, the first question that comes to mind, is there a definition of consciousness that satisfies your need, your question?
Well, to me, it's information exchange. It's now called panpsychism. Everything is conscious in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that everything can give you information, anything physical. It is a form of a color, its hardness, it's giving you pleasure, and we're talking about what physical mechanisms, rocks, the sky, clouds. It depends on what criteria you use to define consciousness. The medical community considers it an anesthetic drug that shifts your consciousness to a different wakeful state. It can be something else, like free will, of course, as a psychologist or philosopher may say, aware of being aware. There's no right or wrong. There's many different types of consciousness. The body organs are even conscious of one another in a sense. They're aware. They exchange information to function normally.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting information from above. How many inventors said, the information was downloaded to me, information came to me? That's another kind of aspect of consciousness where people experience alterations of consciousness or information exchange that they can't figure out. And it stops you in your tracks when something out of the ordinary occurs, let alone receiving information, as many people claim, either via UFO, an orb in the sky, whatever you want, term you want to use for these things that are floating about throughout the eons and still today, of course. Consciousness is a complex issue. We're trying to, for the documentary, The Consciousness Connection, and information about it be found at consciousnessfilm.info. People who are in it are talking about consciousness in terms of how consciousness is altered in a near-death experience or out-of-body experience, exterior to the body. Call that maybe a consciousness separating from the body. When people describe these near-death and OBE events, how about psychoactive agents? A lot of people also consider that to be an aspect of consciousness in terms of experiencing an alternate reality of some type, or a different one that's meaningful, that causes one to have a peak experience, a change in their personal and philosophical viewpoints from that moment forward. Sometimes we have something so profound, like, as people claim, as you know, they see a gray in their bedroom, or they're brought to a craft, they're interacting, they're having psychic effects occurring, ESP, precognition. A lot of this is consciousness is related to the UAP. We see aspects of that, often largely ignored by ufology. Unfortunately, because we need to understand that component. We need to understand the physical and that as well, the consciousness aspect. So we built that into the documentary, as you saw in the trailer. We had Grant Cameron, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, a leading UFO researcher,
Mm-hmm.
Kathy Martin, who led the experiencer research team for MUFON. She's in it. And I used to be a member of FREE, the Dr. Rick and Mitchell Research Foundation. And we published an article a few years ago about our survey on 4,000 people that interacted with this UAP. Well, look, and we'll get to that. But the point is, consciousness is a major component. We're trying to portray it in a documentary using different types of peak experiences, and we'll discuss that.
Justin.
So, I mean, one of these aspects of consciousness seems to be sort of like, plugging into it. And I find that sometimes once you plug into it and you're actually searching for some form of answer or idea, the answers almost present themselves to you because now you're looking for them. Somehow there's an interaction. I had a peak experience in 2018 doing a short documentary on a guy who in 1976 saw a quote unquote sea monster with his dad down, right where the UFO crash of SHAG Harbour happened, in the same general town in the same vicinity. And whilst interviewing him and doing locations, I was also finishing a short documentary on a UFO thing I did. And I'm searching for a lighthouse. All these accidents led me in a direction I wasn't even planning on going. I sent my drone up in the air and boom, there's a UFO right there and it's with me. And I call in a number of people. I won't go into the details because we talked about it on the show before, but all of these accidents led me to this particular point to have this experience. And during that experience, I felt there was an exchange of information, whether I made it up or not. There was something being relayed to me. So, what's the point of me talking about this? Is the synchronicity involved in this, that meaningful coincidence that got me to that point. I want to know about your experience with synchronicity and Dave Beatty in creating the new documentary, because that's really fascinating.
Well, you're really getting at it, and I appreciate where you're going with this. When you become aware of it, you alluded to this. When you become more aware and ask the questions, then you become aware of what synchronistic events, the simultaneous presence of timing and meaning. That's so meaningful, however, that it pauses one because it's beyond coincidence. Um, an example. After I wrote the book Unseen Forces, Integration of Science, Reality, and You, while I was writing it, I knew it was going to be a documentary. Don't tell me why. I just did. A knowingness. Uh, so I then decided to send information about the documentary, my objectives out, to turn it into a documentary to film producers. So the first one I sent to was Dave Beatty of Dreamtime Entertainment, Fort Myers, Florida. We discussed that briefly on the phone, and we met and had lunch. While we're talking, Dave says to me, Bob, did you ever see the Nimitz Encounters, the documentary that got over 5 million views, that blew the lid off the Tic Tac thing? I mean, look at the traction this thing received. Excellent job that he did. And I said, yeah, it's fantastic. Why do you ask? Then he says to me, well, I'm Dave Beatty. Well, I didn't put the two and two together, that he was the one that did the documentary. I didn't know. Of all the producers I'm going to send my information out to, it's him.
Mm.
Okay? Which is kind of interesting because I have a background in ufology with my association with FREE. I like to think we made a little dent in that non-physical aspect of phenomena, and he did in the physical, nuts and bolts aspect. Now we're coming together. Why him? Well, uh, he I didn't. He said I'm Dave Beatty. I said so. I don't look at credits. I don't look at the names of people who produce these things. I'm the one who did, well, he didn't know of me either. I got a little reputation. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I've written books on it and I've been on shows. So he didn't know me. That's fine. The point is, it's meaningful. Like we're supposed to be together to the point where um, a couple of months back, I was on my lanai looking at the stars, and for the first time, I take out my sky view to look at the names of the stars, and I say, uh, I'm going to look at a constellation and try to memorize it. That's what I did. I always look at stars, but not memorize a cluster. So I take it out. Okay, Deneb, I'm looking in the northwest. Move it to the left, about 3 o'clock. I think it's Althena or Altair, something like that. Begins with an A, and then down to the right, Vega. How am I going to remember it? I said, well, acronym D, Deneb, A, Althena, Altair, V, Vega, DAV. Dave, Beatty, Bob, Davis. It's timing and meaning. Like how that's the way I interpreted the meaning to me was that our destiny is written in the stars, literally, in a way. Now, is coincidence, it's little things like that that to somebody else listening to it, doesn't mean anything. If you're in your person's shoes who has a pronounced synchronicity, wow, that lights you up a little bit more. You gentlemen know what I'm talking about. I'm sure your audience does too. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it just knocks your socks off. And go with it though. What do you do with it? How do you interpret it? And what information is that giving you? It's there for a reason. It's like maybe the future is informing your present. Some people will go in that direction. That's been shown a little experimentally. Maybe quantum mechanics is right. The past, present, future exist simultaneously. Well, maybe this is an example of it in the form of a synchronicity, among many other things. People interact with UFOs. They report that. No space, no time. Similar to the near-death experience, an out-of-body experience. These are peak experiences. And the thing is, they get a taste of an alternate reality, man. That's more significant than a synchronicity. When these people have near-death experiences, like we said, out of body, up in the craft or interacting with a being who's maybe lifting their consciousness apart from the body, because these people who are abducted in UFOs, about 80% of them in our survey of about 4,000 people who claim to have interacted with it, say it's like an out-of-body experience. We're now interacting or brought to a matrix-like reality, a non-3D world. You can't put language on that, obviously. We're made for 3D stuff. We evolved here, if you believe in evolution. So we're great at that. When you get to non-3D, it's a different world. I never experienced that. What people are saying when they have a near-death experience, etc. Psychoactive drugs, many things can trigger this. Well, lack of a better term, call it peak experiences. UFOs are part of that. It's a consciousness component to this broad issue that we're discussing here, consciousness. But it's a fundamental one, this UAP, because it's not only a physical phenomenon, there's obviously a psychic component to it. And of course, Alan Hynek and Jacques Vallée back in the 70s at major UN subcommittee hearings, Blue Book, etc. Stuff that's just starting to get on now. That we did it back then, decades ago. Deja vu, right? So the point is, they considered it a physical and mental phenomenon. So far into our terrestrial mode of thought, Alan Hynek said, they knew there was more than just pods coming out of a physical craft landing on Al Holloman Air Force Base and observed by Gordon Cooper, the astronaut who went up in one of the original astronauts, the seven. And he saw him. He reported it. He's on YouTube being interviewed. When somebody like him reports seeing a UFO land and beings come out of the craft, do a little jig and collect some dirt, whatever it is, and go back up. And also said he saw it while he was flying. You listen, my word means nothing. I relay the information in my books. I try to put the pieces together of this complex phenomenon. with UFOs, let alone everything else. And it's frustrating and fun, but it's
Mm.
frustrating to the point where sometimes you need to take a back seat and let's say, all right, I need a break, man.
Yeah.
That so-called rabbit hole is too deep. So,
I was
Yeah.
lucky enough in 1997 to speak with Gordon Cooper, and I heard many of his stories. And I'll tell you one that he thought was fascinating that he heard me talk about at another lecture. We did a few down in Portsmouth and Rye, New Hampshire, and I told him of a story of a case where I went to the beach there with a friend, and all day long she kept sitting up and looking in the sky and would look at me, and it was a beautiful sky like you rarely get in Nova Scotia, featureless. And she kept asking me, "Can you see something?" And sometimes it's there and it's just not there. And I was like, well, "What do you mean?" And she, "Never mind, never mind." This went on all day for a whole day. Nothing occurred. We went back to the same location the second day on this weekend, and several times she said the same thing. And but near the end of the day, I seen her keep sitting up and looking in the sky, thinking, "Oh God, here we go again." And she was not wanting to address it. She knew I was growing frustrated with this, but all of a sudden, aloud, she said, "What's that?" And I knew from the tone and the voice before I sat up and saw it that there would be something that I too would perceive. And there was like something that appeared like a yellow amoeba crawling across the sky and just made no sense. And other people jumped up the beach and seen it. My question to you, Bob, since you've done so much work with consciousness, is why would some people, like this friend, be more attuned to this than other and get the premonition, the early warning, whereas myself and the other present did not? Any idea of what might be?
we could only speculate, obviously, because we're not taught this, and this doesn't exist in books. You can't look at this in the
Mhm.
laboratory, so it's educated guess at best. Either what Valet said, it's a control mechanism that acts upon us. It's an intelligence of some type that, for whatever reason, turns some people on, allows some people to see through and interact with it, while others not. Could that be a possibility? Yeah, I guess so. The other one is that maybe people have different sensitivities, like we do with ESP, or sensitivities to our environment. Perceptions are different somewhat among people. Maybe some people are, you got to speculate. Physiologically, maybe there's a difference in terms of discriminating it, but highly unlikely. It's weird. Normally, when somebody sees something that that should be in your line of sight, we learn that we should see it too if the person next to us is
Mhm.
reporting that. When something like this happens, it breaks the rules. So, that alone is quite significant and proves something pronounced is going on. But the thing is, there is that psychic component. That's what Heineken and Valley were referring to, associated with the phenomenon, the precognition, the anticipation that something's going to happen. Even Hitchhiker from Skinwalker. And I know Kevin Day, one of the pilots from the Nimitz or the Roosevelt, I can't recall. Well, he interacted with the Tic Tac, and he was part of the Nimitz encounter documentary. He said there's a psychic component. These people
Mhm.
take it home with them. They take it home
Mhm.
with them. What's that all about? At least that's what they report. So I don't want to go to Skinwalker, according to Knapp and Kelleher, etc. Among others. You go there with bad intention, you get bad responses. It's like a karma in operation here, and or they'll come home with you and act like a poltergeist, with all members of the family. Now, that's not cool. I wouldn't want that to happen to me, based on what I'm hearing. What's that all about? That's the thing. The complexity of this phenomena is gets absurd. It really, as if somebody, there's theories too. Someone's just tricking us, playing games with us. You come up with all of these opinions, and probably the answer, if we were given it, would go right over our head. We're not capable of even comprehending it. Maybe,
Yeah.
so we can't help but not speculate because we know it's
Yeah.
real,
Well,
and yet, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
before Justin comes up with something else that you said the word trickster, and ballet is often said that seems to be a feature of it. I've often
Yeah.
been, because of my work on Shag Harbor and other cases, been labeled as a nuts and bolts guy. But whenever I send a bio to somebody, I always say I've been noted for that, and I believe at some points there is a physical reality. Often, however, there is a strong, powerful psychic component here that's present, I find, in most cases. And, it's not all nuts and bolts, but you're right. And it's got that trickster element. And especially in these cases where people perceive them differently simultaneously, like, what's that about?
Yeah.
But it shows that special quality, that power is there, in this
That's
consciousness
right.
to get in controlled witness perception, you know?
That's right. That's right. And in fact, the DoD in their recent issuance of a statement about where they stand with UAPs, some of the things they did. We're not going to get the specifics, of course, of what really is going on there. Just a surface, but they mention cognitive. How do they say
Mm,
cognitive human interface? It's
mm,
interesting an area of research that they're performing associated with the UAPs. What does that mean? A mental. In other words, they have done interactions or experiments
mhm,
in our limited, way. They threw they threw Ingo Swann, and I mean, I'm sure they try to remote view the phenomena. And rumor has it Ingo didn't like what he saw, but who knows? Stanford Research Labs, who did work in the remote viewings, Project Stargate, of course, spying on the Russians. An aspect of consciousness, and people report the same thing. They get telepathic downloads from these beings. It's more than just the nuts and bolts. Look, I love to play chess, and I looked at the research done with these orbs that has downland lights, where they're well known for their orbs throughout for forever, I guess. But Massimo Giordani, astrophysicist, studied them for decades in Hasdalen, Norway. Um, he and Dr. Harvey Rutledge, another astrophysicist in Missouri, United States, back in the 80s, two gentlemen, scientists, in other words, in a different time, not much different, but 10 years different place, studied orb phenomena that was unique to that area for over 10 years. Initially, they wrote papers on it, they published on it. They're top level scientists, PhDs, whatever that means. I know it's just a label. I agree with you. I work with enough PhDs to know it's not just a label. You're right. Thing is, while they were categorizing it as a physical phenomenon, of course, a geothermal, atmospheric, blah, 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 towards the end of each one's research, without talking to each other, Harvey Rutledge, back in the 80s, wrote Project Identification about these experiments. His conclusion: they're intelligent. They're intelligent.
mm, mm,
They create synchronicities, purposeful will. Um, yeah, he didn't know how to express it, but there's a mind interaction component to it. Okay, all right, that's his opinion. But then, you fast forward another 10 years to Massimo Giordani, same thing. They threw the scientific method at it, comes up with that conclusion. I spoke with him, and he was and told me, him
mm,
and others, not only him, other Eric Strand, other astrophysicists who study the lights, too few in number. And
mm,
that's why we need more scientists, a multidisciplinary effort. But it could be just orbs, meaning one aspect of the UAP. It could be, people from Mars too, in aluminum spaceships. Who the heck knows? But we could be looking at many different things, a coexisting life form. So our plasma, in other words, or whatever that is, a light orb phenomena, which behaves, looks like plasma. At least that's what these astrophysicists were calling it, the fourth state of matter. We don't understand it at all, but it'll do this. The right angle turns, the splitting, dividing, the things that people see when they describe UAPs. Plasma acts like that too.
mhm,
Similarity, or they same thing? When people are at a CE5 trying to call down a craft, they report these orbs could be intelligent plasma. Speculation. Of a coexisting life form. You have dolphins in the water. You have these guys upstairs. Maybe. But are they tricksters? Or are they here to, enhance spiritual evolution, as a lot of people like to conjecture? Or are they just kids on the block playing games, messing around like we do too, with ants and bugs, or is it simulation virtual reality? We have people in our documentary like Tom Campbell, My Big Toe, he wrote, and, a very popular book, that this is all a simulation. There's another, the stick, another avatar, calling the shots behind the scenes. Hard to get into that could be true. But you know what? It could. But because he has a title, hotshot physicist, whatever, and it doesn't mean they're right. And you said at the very beginning, it's a title. I agree. It's just another person's opinion. And oftentimes, the scientific method can be very misleading and biased. I'm the first one to know that. But you can't apply it to this phenomenon in an easy way. You really can't. We don't have the laws. We don't yet.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here, Bob. It's unbelievable. You talk about conscious human interface. There's lots of evidence of conscious connection to physical reality, simply by using random number generators. We talk about the trickster. I like
That's
to
right.
call the trickster the instigator of curiosity. I think Nietzsche said it best, and this applies to my UFO experience that I had in 2018 and filmed it, by the way. I can send you a copy of that if you like. Is that when you stare, I'm paraphrasing, but when you stare into the abyss begins to stare back, right? It seems like there's a conscious information exchange going on there. We talk about synchronicities. You said that your origin story with Dave one of the synchronicities connecting you to Dave was studying the stars. Diana, Althea, and Vega. I just joined a fun little band a few weeks ago, and the one song we're supposed to start was texted this morning is Althea by the Grateful Dead, and here you are talking about that.
That's it. That's the one. Yeah, Althea.
There's so much to this, but I want to make sure that the audience gets a nice, well-rounded picture of who you are, because your book on the afterlife really is very interesting to me too. Another synchronicity we can make a connection to is Whitley Strieber, because Chris has worked with Whitley on one of Chris's own books, and Whitley has always said that he thinks that there's a direct connection between the visitors and the afterlife. There's some sort of connection there. Is there any insight you could give to us on your work on the afterlife, and maybe the afterlife or energy presenting itself?
Afterlife, afterlife in terms of, oftentimes people say they see their deceased relatives, of course, either through dream states, lucid dreams, or certainly near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, or while they're in the dying process. They'll often report that. It's more common, actually, for the people to say they see deceased relatives and friends than not say it. Studies have shown. Anyway. So there is that element. Maybe again, past, present, future exist simultaneously. So that's the way it is in the other dimension. And you have that unconditional love and other similarities that people report, of course. The question is, are they seeing a different world? We're seeing this world differently. So, and people who interact with UFOs also report a much higher incidence of near-death experiences and recall of past lives. So this overlap among different kinds of phenomena, but what we're talking about is the main umbrella is perceiving an alternate reality, whatever that is, that non-3D, non-temporal spatial world that people report. And that's it. I mean, if that could be proven, obviously, what does it mean? Consciousness is not the brain. We live forever. Many of our important questions are answered right then and there. The question is, how do you prove it? Well, only anecdotally. I mean, there are experiments that highly suggest that the possibility that is true. No slam dunk. certainly not the medical scientific community that wants it quantified, let alone qualified and combined and replicated, etc. Uh, we're throwing bare skins and stone knives at it. Still, we're making progress. We're starting to introduce quantum mechanics into the equation. Obviously, many theories are controversial, yet to be proven, but many are being proven. Law of entanglement, superposition, it explains much of this. Whether or not that's it, and more science, of course, to be evolved beyond that will come about. But I don't know what century that is, but we more than need that paradigm shift because Newtonian physics doesn't get at it, wasn't designed to. We can't expect it to. But scientists in general need to be much more open-minded. And I too applied the principles of Newtonian physics, but you need to be aware of its limitations and admit defeat. Hey, I have no idea, instead of maybe debunking it. Because they can't explain it, they feel it can't be true. A lot of scientists have that chip in their block, and these are PhDs. Doesn't matter. You get too biased sometimes. It's hard. You could just study it your whole life. You get that's your work, the scientific method. So we're talking researchers, more PhD, but non-PhD types who work in all aspects of research. And you have to, but you have to get out of that box when you get into UAPs a little bit. The rules bend. The rules are different. 101 isn't two. It's more quantum mechanics like. It's like I have one ball here and I'm going to throw it. In the world of quantum mechanics, two balls go to two different people simultaneously. It's a different world the way it operates. It's that's a peak experience galore. Can you imagine? But this is see, it's got my attention. I've seen two orbs in the night sky in Sedona, Arizona. A gorgeous place. That made me write my first book, UFO Phenomenon, should I believe. Then about 2 years later, which is like a History 101 text, I'd write a very different book about UFOs now. Coming from academia, I wanted to introduce a newbie to different perspectives, both belief and non-belief. Let the reader decide, because look, millions of people don't know what to believe with respect to this phenomenon. So they don't. So I'm trying to be objective here. You know, tech UFO 101 for freshmen, so to speak. Then I woke up one morning out of a lucid dream. I was suffocating. I knew I was dying. It was a horrific feeling. Woke me up and I knew my dear friend, colleague had died. I knew it. You know what I'm going to say, of course. Later that morning, I found out she died. Well, we were very close. We worked in the lab and all that. And I could see her, based on our conversations, that if there was a way, she would come to me and let me know. Timing and meaning. Talking about, people have this every day. Timing and meaning. To me, it means truth. I can't believe like the back of my hand that there's now life after death. But she died right at that time, around that time. So then I had an experience in Australia, let's call it a Kundalini-like experience, knocked my socks off, wonderful, blissful, but I didn't have control of my body. Somebody was channeling energy into me, or something, and I was all contorted, couldn't control my head, body movement. It looks like if you're an observer of my behavior, you would think I was being tortured, or crying, or in pain. Probably all three. And it went on, and all I kept saying was to this, give me more. I wanted more and more and more. I can't explain it. The best word is bliss. And when you read about Kundalini experience, that term is often used. It's an internal peace and pleasant sensation that's uniquely different, than watching your favorite hockey team, win. A different kind of euphoria, a real true, natural. Anyway, that led me to writing Unseen Forces, my last book. the integration of science, reality, and you, which is serves as the foundation for the documentary. But when we go into the documentary, we've got a lot of experts in near-death experiences, like Eben Alexander, wrote Proof of Heaven, uh, and Jeff Long, the president of the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. Thousands of people have written about their near-death experiences on the website. It's a great resource for people to go to get a sense of what NDEs are all about. It's a wealth of information, but and we have experts in ufology, as I mentioned earlier, scientists like Dean Rading in parapsychology. We have Gary Nolan, who talks about the caudate putamen in the brain being different among experiencers and those with ESP, based on his preliminary evidence, and that it's a familial. He mentioned to me, it's genetic. The other point is, are some brains different? Well, not long ago he was making national, international news about that theory. It's just a heightened area of uh, white matter connectivity, more mature, it seems, a lot more neurons in a certain area of the brain, unique to that group. So is that the antenna? Like you were saying earlier, why do some people see it and others can't? Maybe they have a different caudate nucleus in that region of the brain that has that enhanced connectivity. Is it physiological, like a sixth sense? Like, see, some people have ESP. It doesn't mean I could read the number on the bill that you have in your pocket. It means that I'll get 60% right when you flip a coin, heads or tails, and I have to guess it. 60% right over 1,000 trials, where the average person would get 50%. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it would come out. But if you have ESP, true psychic sense, you
Hmm.
do whatever you do, even 55% is ESP, because it's so statistically significant. In other words, ESP is statistical, and people don't understand that, and that's where the explanation is. In other words, it's like millions to one odds against chance that really could have happened. You see, it's odds, but my gosh, more than 5, 6 standard deviation beyond the norm. We have clear evidence that ESP is real.
Yeah,
So when you
Ryan
start, it is.
understood that. Yeah,
So
Ri
yeah,
yeah, Ryan understood that when he did it. It was all about statistical significance, in
right.
these things in his studies. Another word that we've tossed around quite a bit here, synchronicity. I'm always amazed how few people are aware that the late Carl Jung, one of the first psychoanalysts to really look at synchronicity and collective unconsciousness and these aspects would spill into this, published a UFO book late in his career in 1960 that
That's right.
really delved into all this in those early years while people were, worrying about aluminum saucers from Yarmouth, from Yarmouth, from Mars, and these things, he was already looking at these things that later Valley and some people, when they get seasoned and got in the field enough, realize were just such an integral part of it. But the late Carl Jung, you know, you can't mention synchronicity without him and collective unconsciousness. And I can tell you that people, even that worked in D&D in my country here in Canada on UFOs, were greatly influenced by his work. And one of them had a theory, and I'll tell you, Justin, this was, and I heard of this through a work colleague at the Defense Research Board. They considered that perhaps some of these events, particularly orb events or what they called soft UFOs, light phenomena, that garnered
Mhm.
attention, could simply be an attempt at an alien superconsciousness trying to collect with our collective consciousness or unconsciousness, but humans were not sufficiently developed to make it dependable or, you know, to catch the true meaning of it. But these things were considered by Jung in 1960, and wow.
It is interesting because that idea, the concept, is of course being kicked around today. Can you upload consciousness into a computer? to the point where it is completely intelligent, to the point where not as artificial intelligent, where you are in the computer and experience it and operate almost like true consciousness, whatever that is, at a high level of functioning. Now, if that can be done, and that's where they're trying to go, I have my doubts. Can you really? You could upload maybe the memories of the brain. Yeah, that can be done eventually. We can't do it now, but maybe, yeah, I can see that happening. But the consciousness is not the brain; it's interdependent with the brain. So how are you going to integrate that aspect of true you? Maybe the
Yeah.
non-physical, maybe the part that interacts with it or persists after bodily death. Of course, can you upload that? Maybe it can. I don't know, but in other words, what if you can? More advanced civilizations have got that down. They are projecting their consciousness here. Of course, I agree completely. I've thought of that. I've thought of that myself. In fact, whatever
Hmm.
that's worth. It makes perfect sense. An extension of AI to the point where you can actually project it. Why bother with rockets? So I really got clean energy, free energy. If I can do that with my
Hmm.
consciousness somehow, I don't know if you shoot it with a laser beam or what. Um, Maybe that is an aspect of kind of. Rudy Shield, a friend of mine, an astrophysicist who worked at the Smithsonian Laboratory at Harvard, and knew Avi Loeb of Uemura fame, who identified it, of course, and believes it to be extraterrestrial of nature. Uh, he considered the orbs, he said, Bob, they're quantum amplifiers. Now, he's a physicist, so it's the answer's up his alley, quantum amplifiers, and they're intelligent. I know another neuropsychiatrist who's in our documentary, Rebecca Hardcastle, right? Um, she's interacted with a lot of people, she's done a lot of research in ESP, in autistic savants, and her conclusion is that they're us. Many people have said that, of course, not a unique idea, but a lot of people are coming around to this. Doesn't matter what labels they have after their name, I know. But you want to see scientists turn around because they're afraid to lose tenure, of course, if they pursue this line of research, unless they have
Hmm.
millions of dollars behind them. That's a drag. You really do want to see the medical community, psychological community, of course, to deal with people who are interacting with this alternate reality and phenomena that's changing them in many ways. One is inducing a lot of anxiety and trauma initially, at least. You question reality when a gray walks through your bedroom. I know Reverend Michael J. Carter, a noted researcher in the field, written books on relationship between UFOs and the history of UFO representation in biblical texts, stories of then as they compare to now, of the abduction scenario, interaction scenario. And he and others make remarkable comparisons between the thousands of years um, where that this is experienced back then. And he says to me, I have great respect for him. I said to him, we were Zooming not about a year ago. He goes, so Bob, I said to him, Mike, I wish I knew like the back of my hand that these grays are real and the mantids and all these beings and etc. He says, Bob, a gray touched me. A gray touched
Wow.
me. What's that, Mike? Well, great. I believe him.
Hmm.
I believe him, man. So, but you see, science doesn't buy it because it came out of his mouth. Because he uses his brain, memories involved. Is he selling a book? All of these obvious debunking or too skeptical opinions. The point is, millions of people are saying this. You see, and is it a trick? Is it a ghost? We know ghosts are real. Is it a ghost? We could go on and on speculating what's going on here. And that's why sometimes it just gets too much because you're always asking the same questions with no answers. It's an elusive quest, and it's like you're defeated before you begin. You have to have the right attitude about it, and know, you know, at least I'm not going to have an answer before I at least use this container. And you were going to say, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you'd believe me if I told you that the last interview we did was with Michael Carter. But anyway, that's another whole synchronicity.
No, I didn't
I,
know. Wait, wait, wait.
I,
I didn't know. I
no,
didn't
no,
know.
it hasn't even been
In
released
fact,
yet.
it's not public yet, or is it?
No, no, it's not
Well,
public
that's
yet.
yeah. So that proves I didn't know.
Yeah,
Out of all the
and
guests, you know,
I,
that
I
that proves it to the listeners.
this concept of I love this term quantum amplifiers. That's really cool. This is for all of the pop culturists out there. There's this new show on right now with a guy named Jonathan Van Ness of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. It's a funny show, but it's very factual and fun. And one of his episodes is called "Can We Say Bye Bye to the Binary?" Now, obviously, he's talking about gender and how we use pronouns and stuff like that. But after watching the show, I had to talk with my wife, and I said, "Isn't that interesting? Like you could apply this to computational science now and where computers are going, right? Analog systems are based on ones and zeros, and that's how we communicate, and the computer communicates. And now we're getting into quantum computers where it's a number of scenarios being communicated all at the same time to have vastly superior computations. I've often thought that that is the problem with, I want to call it the old guard, because the new guard sees the world, any sort of situation, as a dandelion ready to seed. It's not just one of the seed pods, but a myriad of seeds for every single event, right? And I look at quantum computing as sort of a perfect analogy of that. Dogma has created a binary system. It's either yes or no. It's black and white, left or right. Like, which party are you with? And I find that the future of science is heading in that direction, specifically with the advent of quantum systems and Geordie Rose and all that he's done with government contracts and quantum computers. I often thought that maybe the Greys were a tactility system developed by a consciousness in another universe in order to interact with the environment and the patrons of that planet, perhaps, that they're visiting, or dimension, or whatever it is. What do you see as the future of, like, what tools, where is the future of the study of UAP and consciousness going? What tools are going to enable us? Because I've heard so many theories about how quantum computers are going to answer these vastly difficult questions, and we're not prepared for the intelligence that we're creating.
Well, we're not prepared for it, and obviously ethics are involved, and we learn the hard way about that. Anytime there's a new toy that's discovered and played with by different countries that hate each other, so there's bound to be strife. And there'll be benefits, true, but it'll be politicized and militarized as most other things are of such magnitude. Boy, that's a good question. I don't know, because we don't have the right laws of science and the right methodology of science. It doesn't exist right now that can be applied to the future, to the study of the questions you're just addressing. I agree with you. You see, and here's an example of the frustrating part of what I was talking about. You're fascinated by it, the phenomena, and yet you're locked in place. That much you can do. I've done some research, but it's qualitative. In 4,000 people analyzing the data and publishing it. So I've done some research about the consciousness component to it and physical in terms of the description of it, but it's coming from the human mind. The frustrating part is I can't apply the tools and the laws of science because they don't exist. You can to some extent in terms of measuring velocity, angular movement, etc. I'm sure we have a lot of data from sensitive devices, but it's limited in scope. It doesn't get at consciousness. Where do you go then? You got to talk to the experiencer. You need a paradigm shift that considers qualitative research, subjective anecdotal evidence as valid as quantitative. Yes, no's. Yin yang, like we were talking about. Maybe the reality is just that, simple as that. Yin yang. You're right or wrong. You're hot or cold. You're happy or sad, whatever. The point is, your paradigm shift must subjective result in the subjective and the physical being integrated into a coherent whole. That's the new science that needs to be adopted here, because you can measure this sort of thing in many different ways physically, but the non-physical component is significant. We need to learn from that. It tells us something about human potential. You can communicate via telepathy. and not using your larynx and whatever. There is more to reality, and that's what people come away with when they interact with it. There's more to reality, and they don't fear death. They look forward to it, in fact, because they know it's so beautiful. That kind of thing. A lot of people who have interactions with UAPs who can claim to be contacted, about 80-90% of people are contacted, not physically taken from their bedroom to the laboratory, in the UFO, so to speak. About 10% of people report that they are physically relocated. Is it my labs though? Is it a psyops of some type, or sperm and egg being collected to breed hybrids? That's a distinct possibility, as people claim. But you see, it's qualitative, so science is not going to accept that. We understand that, unless that paradigm shift occurs, and that's what the documentary should mention as well. So we need for a paradigm shift to
Yeah.
study it.
Chris, just before you interject, I just wanted to make one mention of a young scientist named Deep Prasad, and he's already got millions of dollars in crowdfunding to do this new experiment. I'm trying to get him on the show. Knock on wood, maybe we can get him on the show. But he's trying to use quantum computing to reverse. This is loaded, but he's trying to reverse engineer the UFO using quantum computations because it's going to answer questions that we don't have. One of the things that he says is going to happen once this quantum intelligence erupts is that everything we've loaded into the cloud and into every social media that we've ever used, including one big one which shall not be named, it's all at once. The quantum computer, or that intelligence that arises, is going to expose all our weaknesses all at once and leave us completely vulnerable. And the quantum computer, that intelligence, is going to enable us to maybe for the first time collectively speak as a hive and where we're going. And do you have any comment on that concept? Because I think that's really profound if you really think about that. It has the ability to expose our weakness and our sensitivities instantaneously to the entire world. I mean, whether or not it would do that is a whole other philosophy.
Yeah, that's
an
yeah.
interesting question.
It is an interesting question. It's a leap. It's plausible at some level. There's many other things that are plausible too, and that's one question to ask. I never really considered that. I'll be honest with you. I never have.
Uh,
I,
one of one of the problems I have, Bob, I feel that, when I think about that question Justin just raised, and one of the other problems I have when you're dealing with a lot of conventional scientists when it comes to consciousness, sentience, these questions, is I feel that our consciousness, our as an individual and collectively, is more than the sum of its parts. I don't believe consciousness arises as a side effect of sufficient complexity in the brain or any kind of information system, be it biological or non biological. I think consciousness is something beyond mere complexity. At some point,
yeah.
so much is going on that, we're aware. I don't know. How do you feel? I think
Well,
we're more than that.
some neuroscientists will say consciousness is a result of computation of such a complex nature in the brain itself that this is the outcome. You're aware of being aware. You're aware of everything. Even ESP can be explained maybe by that. While others don't agree, based on some of the anecdotal reports we're hearing from NDEers and experiences of various types. Um, I lost my train of thought, but uh, I don't know.
Well, I think you've
Con-
mentioned in the past, Bob, that you do think that perhaps, and you said it earlier in the interview, that we are
con-
antennas in a sense.
well, consciousness is primary, really. Yeah, exactly. And consciousness is primary. That gives rise to physical matter. It's in response
Yeah.
to your critical question. Yeah, and uh, and it's the fact that it's dust to dust and ashes to ashes for the body, yet people report they persist, proves just that. You're not your body, but interdependent or have a symbiotic like relationship with it, as people like to like to call it. You know, a lot of people from the past, I shouldn't say a lot, but a few, like Valet, even John Keel, McDonald, Hynek, John Mack, of course, Edgar Mitchell, and Brad Steiger, and others too. They got this aspect of the phenomenon, the paranormal part, but it's not. The DoD is now starting to get on board with it when they talk about the human cognitive interface or cognitive human interface. Kind of, it's an interesting way of putting it. Uh, Acknowledging there's a psychological component to it. People do report things strange in varying ways when they interact with it, let alone the strange kinematic behavior that's being displayed from this warship out in the Pacific or in your backyard during a CE5. You know, you talk to too many people who even went to CE5 to say, Bob, you know, that glowing orb the size of a school bus, maybe about no more than 30, 40 yards in front of us, appeared at 1 a.m. in the morning. It blew our minds. Oh, what's that? He's not lying to me. Ray Hernandez, who founded the free organization. You know, I came in late on board, and I left after the article was published to write other stuff and do some other things, and to visit Halifax as well. Beautiful location. And we wanted to go. By the way, I'm getting off the topic. But Prince Edward Island, we had wanted to make it a trip to going up there.
Well, you have to try and get back. It is gorgeous.
We will. You get us a place to stay, and we're there. Okay. Atlantic Time. I forgot about that. That was Atlantic Time. Anyway, getting back on task. Yeah.
That's our music there. I just want to say one thing, Chris, before you end the show. Bob, I'm so sorry. We're definitely going to have you back. This is personally one of my favorite interviews we've ever done because you're so on point. But I've often considered the human being quantumly entangled. We're both physically here, and yet on another level, we're there too. And we're connected by nature. I'm personally going to thank you from the show. Chris, you can say the closing remarks, but I want to remind everyone out there that we are on Instagram and here on YouTube at Forbidden Science UFO. And I want you to like, subscribe, and comment. We would love to have more numbers and to help to keep our show in outer space and our feet planted firmly here on planet Earth. Thank you, Bob, for me. And Chris, if you want to close the show.
Well, you've done a pretty good job, but I just do want to say thank you, Bob. You've given us so much to think about. Hopefully our audience, wherever it is, does so. I know you're going to have me staring at the ceiling tonight, rolling these things around again, you know, and it's a fresh perspective, and you were a pleasure. We'd love to have you any other time, particularly if you have a book, something to plug and help out. Thank God there are people like you with a truly open mind, but your feet firmly on the ground. It was a pleasure.
That's kind of you to say. Thank you both for all that you do, and we need more people like you to help wake people up. So everybody should spread the word that these gentlemen have tremendous guests on their show. I've enjoyed their interviews very much on other shows, and start spreading the word that these guys legit. And I've been on many shows here in the States and then some, and these guys are top notch in my book. They get it. And they're very professional and kind-hearted people. So you're not going to go wrong by spreading the word on this station and this show podcast with these two dudes. Thank you for what you do.
Thanks, Bob.